Let's talk about security. There are 25,000 law enforcement and military personnel along the route there, 30 miles of fencing. It's a short trip, but it's one that is very challenging for law enforcement there.
At this point, we want to invite in Tim McCarthy. He is a former Secret Service agent who was wounded protecting then-President Ronald Reagan from the assassination attempt in 1981. Most recently, the police chief in Orland Park. Tim, so glad that you're here with us today. Talk to us a little bit about the challenges of securing this a multifaceted event like this that is happening right now and will happen throughout the afternoon and into the evening.
Well, you're correct. It is a multifaceted event that started this morning at the Blair House when the president left to go to St. John's Church, to the White House, then to the Capitol. They'll leave the Capitol and do the motorcade down Constitution in Pennsylvania, probably to the reviewing stand to review the different floats and different military units that go by, and then inauguration balls all evening. So it's a massive event. It's something that's been done quite a few times before, as you know, very successfully. The fact that it was moved inside, I think that helps from a security standpoint, because even though there'd be heavy bulletproof glass between the president, the vice president, and others, and the rest of the crowds out there, being inside is a better security environment. As we know, it takes away the high ground, which was a problem in Butler, Pennsylvania. Shouldn't have been, but was. So it's a better event. I believe no stone is being left unturned on this. On the other hand, I don't think there's, in most cases, a whole lot more to do now than there was in the inaugural events that I went to in '89, 81 and '89, with the exception now that we have unmanned aerial vehicles that are an issue. But I know Secret Service has technology in place to address that.
Tim, what about monitoring either the Secret Service or the NSA, any kind of internet or phone activity that may be going on? Can they listen into that kind of a thing?
Well, most of the communications are encoded. So whether it's the president or Secret Service, and many police departments at this point, the communications are encoded, so that would make it much more difficult. But the communications, the physical security that's in place is the most important part of it in any case. And I believe that they've gone to great lengths to ensure that this one is it's a no-fault, no-fail type of event, as always with the president. And I think they're up to the task this time.
Tim, hi, this is Paul. First of all, thank you for your service, sir, through the years. I'm sure you're familiar with the book called Zero Fail by Carol Leonnig, which really put the Secret Service under a lot of heat and evaluation. Out of curiosity, what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania versus a day like today, does the Secret Service, is an event like today so number one that there's no way there's any issues, and are there times the Secret Service isn't as worried, or do you think those kinds of moments should never have happened?
Well, the Butler thing should never have happened. That was a complete failure. It really came down to the fact that they asked this counter sniper team to take on a responsibility that they're not designed for. They're not designed to prevent people from going on a building. They're designed that when someone somehow does get on a building, it has an overview to neutralize that. So that was a failure. What worried me more, however, was the event in Florida. Now, it's a risk-resource type of no-fail type of environment. But after what happened in Butler, and there was supervisory failures there along the way as well, but what happened in Florida after that somehow they thought that they could take the president golfing on a Sunday, which I think all of us know that when he's in Florida, he golfs on Sunday. Maybe he golfs at a couple different golf courses, but I think it's primarily one. And to have that event take place where that street and that fence line was not secured bothers me even more than Butler, that somehow they thought that was just another routine off-the-record movement by the president. So very concerned of how they handled security for former President Trump at that time, and he was not the nominee. But going back to presidential protection, since 1981, when we had the attempted assassination attempt, there hasn't been an attempt on the president. And that's about 40-some years now. So presidential protection itself is up to it. But former President Trump obviously did not get that type of protection at Butler, and unfortunately after that down in Florida. So I'm concerned how that could have happened. Who would have thought that that was an off-the-record impromptu movement of the former president, and that street wasn't posted with Secret Service agents, local police, or the street was not blocked off in total when the president was former president was anywhere near it. So that concerns me more. But that's security for a former president that should have been ramped up but was not, obviously, versus security for the president of the United States, which has been awful good for 40-some-odd years, based on the fact that there hasn't been an attempt. So there's a difference, but I don't know why there was a difference, maybe at Butler, but especially in Florida.
But Tim, you look at these lone actors, people that might not be on the radar of law enforcement. How much of a threat might that be, even in the case of a president who is well protected, no doubt?
Well, in a case of presidential protection, it really doesn't matter who the potential assassin is, whether it's a well-organized group or, as the history has shown us, the lone gunman. The protection is in place to address both. And that's why, everyone goes through metal detectors. That's why he's in an armored car. That's why there are counter assault teams and counter sniper teams. And that's why perimeters have been set up at the Capitol and all of the locations that he's staying at. So security for the President of the United States is for the lone gunman, who, you're right, has been the historic assassin. But whether it's the lone gunman or the organized attack, the security for the President of the United States is set up to address both.
Tim, the Secret Service details that are with the president now and the president-elect, will they stay the same when, the transfer of power happens?
Yes. I went to Washington assigned to the presidential detail with President Carter and switched over to President Reagan. The detail switches over in roughly thirds from the president, from the person who becomes a former president to the president-elect. And it was also there the second time with President Reagan when he left office, and then we switched over to President Bush. So the Presidential Protective Division, those details and those people assigned to it are only with the president. And President Biden will have a new detail, has been formed for him, that will, he'll determine where his primary residence is going to be, and they'll be stationed out of there. So that's been done, that's been taken care of, and when he leaves, generally he'll, at the Capitol, he'll go out the east side, get on a helicopter, go to Andrews Air Force Base, and fly to wherever. I believe he's going out to California, yes. And he'll be taken there. I did that with President Reagan, in fact, after the inauguration of President Bush. Took the president, Mrs. Reagan, we went out the east side on a helicopter out to Andrews, and then went to California and motorcaded to their new residence, which I had set up the security for. Took them there, said our goodbyes, somewhat emotional, left and went back to Washington, D.C., and was reassigned, of course, with President Bush.
And the person who is carrying the Secret Service agent, carrying the football with the nuclear codes, will just take 2 steps closer to President-elect Trump and 2 steps further away from Biden. In other words, that person stays the same and just starts accompanying the president.
Exactly. It's a military, not Secret Service, that handles the football. But you're exactly right. They'll just go with President Trump now and not with former President Biden.
Tim, is there any shift? Dina talked about the lone gunman situation, which has been what they've been facing for so often. But with incoming President Trump, we've got the issue of Iran, for example, who is after him. Any difference in terms of how the foreign threats would be handled for a moment like today?
Well, they probably weren't taken as seriously as they should have until the assassination of President Anwar Sadat in Egypt by his own military that stormed the reviewing stand and killed him and many others. But prior to that, Secret Service had counter assault teams in place, and of course, counter sniper. So that is parcel of presidential protection, to have that type of protection, because you're right with the bad actors like Iran. And not only is the threat come from the lone gunman, but it could be, in fact, an organized attack. So that is taken into account, and that's why you see so much armor everywhere, whether it's armored cars or armor being used at reviewing stands, armored glass. Not that it is going to stop a long barrage, but you're looking for that time to react and take the measures that are already in place when something like that takes place.
Tim McCarthy, keep enjoying these days with your grandchildren. And to echo what Paul said and Dina's sentiments, we thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Take care, sir.